Thanks a lot, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks a lot. You know, the San Antonio Symphony will be presenting a Tchaikovsky festival, so it's not a coincidence that we're here today at KLARN to go a little bit, have a little inside look into Tchaikovsky, and maybe a tiny little look into his soul and what was behind the man and this music. The Tchaikovsky Festival will be something very exciting, I think, not only for the symphony and for me and for us working so intensely on 6 symphonies and 2 piano concertos together, but also for you, for the community, and also for, I think, for our audience, because it is a very intense 2 weeks of Tchaikovsky. I know I don't believe so much in this ranking of composers, what you see now at New York Times, who are the top 10 composers. I find no actually interest in that ranking. You can't rank art. I don't think it's really possible. But if there is a ranking, there's one thing that is for sure, that Tchaikovsky will be under the top 10 composers just because of popularity and his influence on the music world. I think he is just like the best example of the romantic composer. And that's also because his own life became part of his composition. All he wrote was very personal, and he expressed through music his own world, his own suffering, his own struggling with life. He was not like Mozart, the child prodigy that just came up and wrote symphonies, you know, at the age of 6. No, very late he came to composing. Very, very late. Actually, he started when he's really studying composing and theory when he was 23 years old. So in a very short time then made it up to, you know, to the Olymp of music. But he had a very tough way getting there. And most of his works haven't been received very well. And being a very hypersensitive person, he really suffered from that. I mean, for example, Rubinstein's comments on his first piano concerto, which is maybe also one of the top 10 piano concertos in the repertoire, are just devastating. And of course it affected him. His symphonies, we could divide them into 2 big blocks. The first 3, which are very much folk tune based national examples of Russian music. Number 4, 5, and 6 become the personal journey of a composer and really linking Russia with the rest of Europe. And it comes to a very interesting point when we now look at the slow introductions of Symphony number 4. He writes a mon meilleur ami, which means to my best friend. But who is this best friend? And again, now it becomes very romantic. Nadezhda von Meck, a big sponsor. She actually paid him 6,000 ruble a year, which was really very comfortable to live on. So he could be free as a composer, not dependent on anything. She wouldn't ask any questions. And he could write his music and just dedicate himself to his art. Fantastic personality. We never know when they met first, Nadezhda von Meck. So this dedication to my best friend is to Nadezhda von Meck. And now listen to the slow introduction of the 4th Symphony. It has this Latin title, Fatum, which means fate, destiny. And this is, I think, the journey we're going to take this afternoon. Where are we in harmony with our destiny? And here we see something that is there is a rebellion, and we feel that from the very first moment. The horns and the bassoons at the beginning, very dark but very forceful, like the destiny is knocking at the door with all force. But there is resistance, there's struggle, and he fights against it. You know, that slow introduction leads into something that is waltz-like feeling, and the waltz is a very important part. The first piece we played today was a waltz. Later in his Sixth Symphony, he actually takes the waltz upside down, putting it in a 5/4 measure, which is quite strange. It's like the devil dancing the waltz with leaping a little bit. And you know, you see the hunchback dancing the waltz. I think also in that first waltz we heard, it was not a waltz of joy, but someone sitting aside and watching people enjoying the waltz. And I think this is a little bit behind the soul of this man. The Fifth Symphony, actually, is a symphony he wasn't satisfied with. Actually, he thought it was a complete failure, and almost on the verge of destroying this symphony, which is, of course, would have been a disaster. Maybe it was too personal. Maybe his own life came too close to him, and when he listened to this music or when he later conducted it, it became too much. Now, listen to the slow introduction of the Fifth Symphony. Here he actually writes in his program notes to the symphony, for the slow introduction, complete acceptance of fate. So the rebellion that you heard here now disappears. And now it goes even darker. We heard now, the beginning was horns, lower register, and bassoons getting a dark brass sound, also when the low brass comes in. But now we have the clarinets in their lowest register playing with only the low strings accompanying. You see the first violins are not doing anything in this low introduction. And it becomes very dark, and as I said, acceptance of destiny is what Tchaikovsky sees in that. think it's finding peace that we feel here at the end, though it's not a peace that is completely happy, of course. It's a peace to deal with fate. When it comes to his last symphony, number 6, and that is the spooky part of it, he actually wrote before he finished the symphony, this is going to be my last piece of music. This is going to be the climax of what I'm able to compose. And that he said in the year he died. And he couldn't know that he was dying, of course, hopefully. Well, there are many theories. Did he die of cholera? Or did he kill himself? And it wouldn't be a romantic composer if there are not many theories and many doubts and many things to share, because it is, you know, his life was very, very adventurous in a certain way, especially at this time of the end of this century, and we feel that something is happening. The world is not the same anymore. And we are at the end of this 19th century, which was in a certain way very glorious with the Industrial Revolution, and it becomes also almost on the level of decadence to collapse. And we feel this in the symphony, I think, very clear in his 6th symphony. He does also something which is very rare and very revolutionary. He finishes with a slow movement, something no other composer would ever dare doing, because it's like anticlimactic. Hello, everybody applauds for the 3rd movement, and then it feels almost like a downer, but it doesn't. This uplifting, and then we are coming back to this 5th symphony, acceptance of fate, you know. This resurrection, we almost have the feeling at the end of his 6th symphony. Gustav Mahler, who was a big fan of Tchaikovsky, inherited this pattern in his 3rd, and of course in his final symphony, number 9. He does it though in a very opposite way. We are listening now to the introduction of the 6th symphony. We went from the clarinets, already very dark, now into a much darker territory. The bassoons now presenting the main theme. And now he doesn't even use the cellos, but only the double basses. Also very rare here, now he divides the double basses into 2 lines and doesn't fill anything in the middle. So it's almost, there's a gap between this lowest octave and the bassoon, and there's nothing in the middle. There is no hope. There is nothing to hold on to. And I think this is yearning and longing and all this you don't hear in any better example at the beginning of this 6th symphony, and when the bassoon really has this last gasps to something, reaching out that is to something that is not of this world. So listen to the beginning of this slow introduction of his Symphonie Pathétique. You think, how dark can we go? How depressive can we go further? Is there any hope? No, Tchaikovsky wasn't a man that only was dark. He had a lot of bright sides and a man of enormous power. And we know all these ballets, you know, Swan Lake and Sleeping Beauty and Nutcracker especially, such a delightful piece full of humorous music. So it is not only about this, but it always starts with this. He always needs the music to get him out of this darkness. And he does that in the sixth in a very brilliant way. The journey from this first movement into the second movement, which is, I was talking about this waltz in a 5/4. He comes to this march, which is, in a certain way, the most brilliant scherzo ever written in a way. It builds up to a climax that can't be beaten. And it's one of the most brilliant pieces in orchestral music. And I've never experienced, actually, even in the most educated audience, an audience that doesn't applaud after the third movement, because it's just, it takes you there. The amount of energy that he's building up is enormous. And so I think it's this man living triple speed, like all big composers and all big creative people did. They live triple speed, a life that is so full and so rich, and they have so much to give that they burn out much faster. You know, I always say, you know, Mozart dying at 35, he was maybe 90, or what he did, he was a Methuselah, and he was at least 150. And Schubert, in a certain way, the same thing. Tchaikovsky, with 53, already very old, but given the fact that he started late. These lives are full and rich, but that a composer, and this is very like Mahler, feels that this is the final work is very special. And I think this last force in that third movement, building up, shows that the heart can't take much more. So to finish this session today, which should have been a little journey into the soul of Tchaikovsky, we will finish this with this uplifting march from the third movement of his Sixth Symphony from the Pathétique.